Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Ben.
Oh, shit. I thought I had somebody else here this week.
Yeah.
I mean, welcome back, Ben.
Neither of us are so lucky.
I don't know. I feel like a king because I just finally flopped down $8 to get one of these. I've been running this million-year-old laptop for the show, and it's got 2 USB ports.
Yeah.
And a broken keyboard.
Yeah, and a whittling knife for when it is slowed down. So basically, I could have the one of the USBs is my cordless mouse, and then the other one, I'd either have to plug in my second an actual keyboard so I can use the keyboard without having to pound on keys with my fist, or the microphone. I could only use one or the other. Nice.
And I just finally bought one of those USB extension hubs for $8, and I can plug all 3 things in at once. So I feel like I'm living the high life here.
Yeah, the amount of mileage you have gotten off that piece of shit is pretty incredible. I'll give you that.
The best part is this is an old work laptop so I never even paid for this. This is just one that outlived its usefulness and couldn't be used in the office setting anymore. And it's it either gets burnt or it runs a podcast for 220 episodes.
I just feel like if anybody asked me about who's your co-host on your podcast, the image I would paint is you live in a basement with a laptop from 1995, and we just occasionally throw hardtack down there for you to eat. And
it's not far off. Yeah.
So and that's your life now.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to the show.
If I didn't have 2 young kids that need constant everything, Tara probably would lock me down here. But that's the one utility for me of having kids is that it makes it forces me to have usefulness, so she can't get rid of me.
And one day you'll bring that usefulness to the show.
No.
So yeah, welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. Every week on this show, we tell each other's stories. I don't know why I stumbled over that part. It's one part.
It's the hardest part of the show.
I have repeated 221 times.
I kind of feel like there's been at least once in your day-to-day normal life where you were talking to somebody and just out of habit you said it's if you've not listened to me before, every week I bring a new story. Oh fuck,
if you haven't listened to me before, why start now?
Well, yeah, that'd be a good catchphrase for our show.
So yeah,
we're content with the exact number of listeners that we currently have. If you're new, go away.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm feeling like a king because I'm drinking a Dr. Pepper, and I'm easily pleased.
That sounds pretty good. I've been drinking just water.
That's probably for the best. I was actually
It is. I feel way better, but it's just depressing. You're
I was actually having, not unusual if you've listened to this show, but I was having a horrible bout of gut problems yesterday. And that's probably directly tied to the fact that I reward myself with Dr. Peppers and not water, which my body actually craves.
I was watching The Sopranos the other day, and it was the episode where Tony got food poisoning from wherever. Yeah. They went to an Indian restaurant, then he ate clams. So that's a perfect storm. That's probably
the best episode in the entire show, in my opinion.
It was interesting because it was that fear and loathing in New York City, I guess, almost because those fever dreams he had. But anyway, his wife was oh, stay in bed. I'll go get you a Coke. And I'm wait, is Coke supposed to be good for your stomach when you're
anything bubbly can kind of technically can kind of settle, but in general, I've pretty much it wasn't a tummy ache I was gonna vomit or anything. It just
I ate too much bad shit. And,
and now my fucking body rebelled. But I only go to ginger ale and stuff in those moments.
Yeah, see, I've heard that
because ginger actually does 7-Up. Ginger is supposed to actually directly help.
Yeah.
And it's tasty.
And then 7-Up has been, when I was little, that's what, if I was sick, and again, not necessarily like stomach-related things, but just sick in general. When you can't stomach, like, regular food.
Any, like, lemon lime thing's supposed to work, but the exception for that, to me, is, like, anytime I've tried to have Sprite, in those moments I have a stomachache, for some reason, that just hits way harder, and I feel like fucking shit.
Yeah, well, and I think it seems for me like the sugar. Like if my stomach's off, having anything that's really, really sugary is a bad idea, and that's why Coke kind of was like jarring to me in that episode, because Coke is like 99% sugar.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
They didn't want it to be that way. They wanted to give you cocaine. And,
yeah, that's what she meant. I guess I wasn't. They never specified. Like. Actually, I think they did. I think she brought the can of Coke in, but it could have had cocaine in it. I don't know. He's Tony Soprano. I mean,
yeah. Did you know? Like, did you ever hear about that thing where like you can't eat a banana and then drink Sprite without throwing up?
I have not, but
because
I have bananas, so I'm going to buy Sprite.
No,
and try it.
If you do, like something about the potassium and the Sprite, you just erupt like pure foam and vomit up foam. I have seen a couple of videos where people have done this.
Yes, but that is not dissuading me at all. It is probably good that we don't have Sprite in the house, because I do have bananas in the house. You know what? It would be fucking worth it, because I'll wait till tomorrow morning and then be like, oh, I can't go to work or watch the kids. I'm vomiting foam. It's weird.
Dan Riker and Danny O'Dwyer had a video, and they took it down, I think, and I don't know why. It was brilliant, where they like lost a bet on the 4th of July and did the fucking Sprite banana thing, and they're just sitting in lawn chairs in their front yard, and just like the whole time they're eating and drinking the soda, and just like, I don't know why this is bad. Like, I don't know I know something awful is going to happen, but because it's how we lost a bet, but like, fuck. And
I like to think it hits like 48 hours later, though. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, it's just that thing. It's just like you do it for a while, you just gradually feel like you feel the bubbly. Uh-oh. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've had so many stomach problems over the years. If I did that, because the expansion before you puke.
That's what would scare me. Is like, I know that would just like fucking.
I would rupture something and die.
Yeah, I know. I would fucking pop like a balloon.
Mm-hmm. But still, it's slightly tempting.
Yeah. So tune in, episode 300. I'm gonna pop like a balloon.
Yeah. To be fair, both of us vomiting to death on the show would probably be our highest rated episode.
Yeah. Just like, it wouldn't go the way I would want it to. Like, the explosion would happen, but it would be out my asshole. And I would just blast away like Team Rocket.
You hit your head on your ceiling and die from the concussion. You become an episode of CSI where they're like, Ice-T looking at it. It's like, I've seen this before.
Law and Order.
You kids call it fizzy ass.
Potassiass.
Potassiass.
All right. So, that's an upcoming story, but what do you have for a story today? Did you do your homework?
I did. And I actually did it in advance, so I don't know what the fuck's wrong with you. Drink water, kids, and all of a sudden your life starts coming together.
Yeah, don't start fucking, like, becoming a well-rounded individual. That'll kill the spark.
Quit drinking alcohol, started drinking water, and all of a sudden, like, things are making sense. My brain's working again. Weird. So I do have a story this week. This week's story isn't that long, but it's also not that good, so ultimately I think it balances out.
Awesome. Those are my favorite. We're just trying to speed run this shit.
So like many his age, Frank Lenz was born in 1867.
Frank Lenz?
Frank Lenz.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. The Franklins.
Yeah, I wrote this whole fucking thing and read through it and I never realized how that sounds like out loud. Franklins. Yeah. Multiple guys named Franklin.
The artist formerly known as Franklins.
It's one guy named Frank and his last name is Lenz. It's not multiple Franklins.
Until the end of the story when he's cloned himself.
Right. He was among the dozens of babies born in Philadelphia at the time. By the time it was 1884, 17 years had passed. Facing a midlife crisis, Frank, who was now working as an accountant, spent a full month's salary on a Boss new penny farthing, which sported a 52-inch front wheel and only weighed 55 pounds. So it was slightly lighter than a stagecoach.
So
if you forget what the term penny farthing means, like I always do, it's one of those stupid fucking bikes with the giant front wheels.
Yeah, those are fucking tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
I'm waiting for Red Bull to get in on that and make it like fucking extreme mountain penny farthing.
Fairness, that might be pretty cool. Only because of that thing, it's almost a NASCAR thing. You'd watch it not because it's cool, but because there's a great chance somebody dies.
You know the biggest fucking travesty is we got like 4 trials games and not one pennyforth bike in any of them.
What the fuck? You're right. I've never thought of that.
Yeah.
And that would make a very, very good game one of the best games ever made, I think. That one little addition.
Fucking Ubisoft, get it to fucking together, man. Come on.
Ye old trials, revolutions.
I'm gonna have a hard time focusing. Now I'm pissed. They've wasted that series.
So historians and biographers aren't sure if it was the ability to travel the streets slightly faster than he could walk on foot, or if it was the towering bird's eye view that the bike provided.
The sense of power.
Right. But one thing they're sure of, Frank quickly became obsessed. He would soon join a biker gang, though because mounting and dismounting the high-wheeled cycles involved a ladder and provided quite laborious, the gang eschewed violent criminal acts in favor of soliciting shouts of "What the fuck is that?" and finger pointing from onlookers.
Pennyforth is already it's already a hilarious image. The idea that you're in a gang. It
was technically a cycling club, yes, yeah. but yeah, can you imagine, like, seeing one person ride on a bike like that would be, like, the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. Seeing multiple people doing it, like, together.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it would be hilarious, and I simultaneously would think I'm in danger.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that they seem... I don't know whoever was the first person to climb on top of one of those and think this might be an okay idea, because it's not.
It's so fucking scary. Like,
yeah, you can't even be near one when somebody else is on it without, like, your life being in jeopardy. So, I don't know. But apparently they used to roam the streets of... he was born in Philadelphia, but he lived in Pittsburgh at this time. They moved.
Traitor.
Right. No word if he switched over to become a Steelers fan, even though neither franchise existed yet. That's not the point.
Maybe by this point, the Eagles were technically, like, there was like a year or something, they were the Yellow Jackets or some shit.
Yeah, we're in the late 1800s here.
When did football start?
I don't know. I have not done that as a topic, even though we talk about it before every single show that we record.
I thought you did your research, goddammit. You should know I'm going to derail this shit to talk about my favorite football team.
I was too busy picturing this douchebag riding around on a penny farthing, to be frank.
Yeah, Born to Be Wild's playing, but it's a very old-timey rendition.
It's Barbershop Quartet. Anyway, it didn't take Frank long to set the 24-hour distance record for a cyclist, riding 162 miles in a single day, which I assume is because he couldn't figure out how to get the fuck off the bike.
Yeah, and too proud to admit.
Right.
So I know, I just love riding it so much.
But Frank wasn't content with only looking ridiculous in front of onlookers. he wanted to share his stupid hobby with the entire world, so he took up photography as well and began recording his travels on film. Which was great because when I first read that, I'm thinking 1800s. I'm picturing one of those giant fucking cameras with the accordion things in front and the like tripods and stuff. So now you're riding a penny farthing with this 800-pound camera on your back. But unfortunately, when I did look into that, cameras had become much more portable by this time.
They were still, bricks, but
they weren't. Yeah.
But it wasn't like you didn't have to like fucking strap a guy into a chair for a year to take his photo while the machine warmed up. Like, but it is kind of props to him because we see the evolution of that now on YouTube and stuff of people who just film themselves fucking riding bikes and shit and like traveling around. So he was He was the first.
And it said
vlogger.
he would take pictures using a timer, or they had those like corded triggers that you've seen. And I'm sure you've seen. They're just like a little button on a cord. But then I was picturing him riding a fucking penny farthing with a corded handle, trying not to pull the camera over and take a cool looking picture. But I think it was probably more him standing like in front of his bike taking landscape. I don't fucking know. I didn't look up his photos because. I don't care. This is an audio podcast.
Way to land on their topic.
Yeah. So like any young man, Frank had a hero he looked up to more than any other. However, he was, and to this day probably still is, the only man whose hero was a large wheel cyclist. Like, there was somebody else that rode penny farthings that this guy looked up to, and I just cannot imagine you being like, that is so cool. I'm going to be like that guy. Like, I have never once thought that when I've seen somebody on one of these bikes.
You just haven't felt the power.
Yeah, it's true. Maybe I'm just...
The prestige. It was probably like the same thing as like the first person to fly a plane, just like realizing I could crash this thing into that building and do permanent damage. It's just fucking...
Yeah, and in fairness, you're right too. The first couple airplanes were pretty fucking stupid looking too. Like the Wright brothers are the first to fly, but they built their plane backwards. Have you ever seen it? Like the little tiny wings are in front. That's not how planes work.
Also, they're just hanging on for dear life. Get a chair.
That too. Although I liked all the like prototypes people built where they made the wings actually flap. I wish that had worked. So when you were out like mowing your lawn, you look up and you see a flapping airplane going by. That would be sweet. Like, that's the future I wanted.
Oh man, I wish they were mechanically built like that now. So much shit would go wrong.
And even riding on them would be the most uncomfortable. Like,
yeah, you would feel like you're in a big metal dragon.
Mm-hmm. Although, that sounds cool. It sounds a lot cooler than the reality of it would be. But so Frank Lenz's hero was a Thomas Stevens, a British man from England, who, having departed from the... departed on his Columbia 50-inch standard penny farthing, because all these articles were very specific. Apparently they had like all sorts of competing brands.
Model is everything.
Mm-hmm. It still is. Yeah. So I get that. Like, I just didn't realize that people were like, well, this and that is the best bike, like back in the 1800s when no bike was the best bike because their wheels were taller than houses.
Yeah.
But anyway, he had one of those bikes, and he departed from San Francisco in 1884. He had pedaled like the devil until he became the first man to complete a bicycle trip around the entire world, and also the first man to ever return to San Francisco after leaving it.
That was just because the big wheel, like, it wouldn't break. So, like, momentum.
Yeah. They hadn't invented the brakes yet. Because nobody knew what to do if you actually stopped on one of those bikes. Because the second you stop, you're toppling over.
Yeah.
Frank Lenz figured if he couldn't be the first man to travel around the world by bike, he could at least be the other man to do it.
Fair enough. There always needs to be a runner-up.
Right. Actually, I was disappointed to find out multiple people had done this feat for some reason.
Okay, so he's the 17th man to penny fart. That's still hell of a deal.
But you're probably going to be as disappointed as Frank was. By 1890, and much to Frank's dismay, the world had started to realize that making a bicycle with a front wheel that's 800% larger than the rear wheel is stupid. And it made quite a lot of sense to create a bike with equal-sized wheels.
You know, there was just like years of like purists, like for your fucking little tiny dinky wheel, huh? You're not ready for a man's wheel?
Frank was one of those. He fucking hated these new bikes.
I hate practical and more capable machinery. Fuck.
So despite the fact that it is very possible to horrendously injure or kill yourself on one of these chain-driven equal-sized wheel bikes, I think we've probably all had situations where we could have been killed on our bikes. I know I have gone over the handlebars a number of times.
I feel like that's a necessary step in bike riding. Is like it's kind of like skateboarding. Like you know, if you've ever done any of these things, you kind of need to eat shit, you know, a few times to really say you understand it.
And I desperately want to see some of the times that Frank Lenz ate shit on a penny farthing, because that would be way better to watch.
The thing is,
it happened.
You eat shit on a penny farthing, like you're out for fucking 6 months. Yeah. You know, that's what's great about these new bikes is you could just get a scrape, not a fucking shattered collarbone. And
it's like, and my point was like, despite, you know, we know bicycles have danger. I mean, they can be very dangerous. They're relatively safe, especially now. But, you know, they're still relatively dangerous, but they still became known as safety bikes because compared to the penny farthing, it's like, oh yeah, like that thing's a fucking death trap. This is a safety bike. We haven't invented brakes yet still, but
imagine like the rest of you have, like you and like 4 friends go riding a bike and one friend refuses to stop penny farthing.
Yeah. It'd be like it would end up looking like, because this is the time of year I just saw it, where you have like the mother goose and all the little baby geese. Like,
there's no chance in hell I would be following that douchebag. If there's one douchebag,
well, I'd rather be behind him than in front of him, though, because you know he's just going to come crashing into you because he can't.
The thing is, like, I absolutely, for sure, would outrun him.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to be associated with him at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I would take the first fucking like left turn. Like, oh, sorry.
Guys, wait up! It takes me three blocks to turn left.
I have to write a fucking formal letter to my big wheel to let it know we need to turn.
So, as much as Frank hated these bikes that were designed for pussies who couldn't stand being 10 feet off the ground and have no obvious way of dismounting,
and wanted to move practically,
right? He also knew that the times they were becoming different, and nobody would sponsor his trip unless he evolved with the technology.
So he made one giant back wheel.
Well, that's what I'm curious, like the one, like everybody, the penny farthings were out there, and everybody was, except for Frank and his biker gang apparently, were like, this clearly is not the answer. Let's keep designing here. And you know, like at the same time, there was like 8 people that came out, were like, aha! Yeah. And out of the 8, 7 of them designed bikes that had both small wheels, and 1 designed a bike that had both giant wheels. And he was like, oh, yeah, I was just joking with this.
I really, you know, it is a real shame that, like, they modernized the bike a little bit before they got the opportunity to, like, to misguidedly think that the penny farthing was, like, the premium model to how to design all vehicles, because we could have just gotten a whole stretch of cars with giant fucked up wheels in the front.
Yeah, and I know, and The difference here, because this episode will end up getting listened to by like one like cycling purist.
Yeah.
The reason the penny farthings had that giant wheel is they didn't have chain drive back then, so the pedals were like directly welded to the wheel. So you do get a lot more like that's how you can pedal a bike without it like being super fucking impossible, because yeah, it's just the physics. You're pedaling a smaller circumference to move a bigger one. It's basically you're the gear. So the safety bike, the actual invention there wasn't two equal-sized wheels. It was the chain drive that allowed you to, get that leverage that way instead of by pedaling one giant fucking ridiculous wheel.
Yeah. Imagine if you fleshed out an idea and didn't just like bum rush the first fucking impulse invention.
That's the funny thing. It's like you could say, oh, well, they didn't have the tech. They had the technology. Chains had been used and pulleys had been used for hundreds of years.
Imagine inventing the damn thing and like, it's like I'm just seeing one guy like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea, so how do we make it? And before you can even get that thought out, the other guy's like, we'll just make the wheel fucking huge. That way you can work.
Yeah. Unless you hit a pebble or a small bump in the road or you just have to stop to take a piss. Like there's no stop. I'm curious. I'm not real sure how that worked. I'm sure I could find videos of it. I'm not that curious. I'm medium curious. But anyway, he knew if he was going to get to travel around the world by bike, at this point, nobody was going to pay him to do it on a penny farthing because that was stupid and had already been done stupidly. So he begrudgingly adopted a regular bike.
It's like, my God, this thing works so well.
Right. Basically, I left this part out of my notes, but at one point on his trip, he went through Yellowstone as kind of a detour, and he took his bike instead of a stagecoach, of course, because you're on a fucking around the world. If you're planning to bike around the world, but you get to Yellowstone, you're like, well, this is the one part I can't do on a bike. Well, you're not going to fucking make it around the world.
Like the fucking most American stretch.
Right. And I get that it was probably a lot of hills and it was tough, but so was the rest of the fucking world.
That's the whole point.
Right.
Like, if you want it to be easy, then, fuck you.
But he had wrote about going through Yellowstone on his bike and how much closer to nature he felt and how it's great and how everybody should go through Yellowstone on a pneumatic, tired, whatever the fuck bike. I don't know.
Yeah, and then he gave up the bike and rode the bison the rest of the way.
So he was either a spineless shill just saying that for his sponsorship, or he realized within the first block, he's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is way the fuck better.
Oh man, that fucking giant wheel sucks.
How much of his unwillingness to leave the penny farthing was probably because he spent so much fucking money on the penny farthing?
Absolutely. And we have that.
Because we see people do that today, yeah.
We have that now with all sorts of fucking technology. I remember with the original Xbox, and most youngins today, you got started with the 360 and God bless you. You avoided a lot of bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
But the original Xbox had a giant fucking controller. It was huge. It was...
Oh, yeah. It was like a play school toy.
It's about the size of a fucking GameCube and twice as dense. And, and I remember, relatively early in that console, they made a new controller for Japan that actually fit human hands, and they brought it over to the States a little after that. But there was this section of people who were like, nah, the Duke, man, that's the best controller. And it's like, yeah, I love to fucking have to chart an expedition to hit the Y button.
The best controllers all require a tripod to use. So yeah, I'm imagining some of it's that. It's like he was into it and he was really into it. He spent a lot of money on it, and then the world changed from underneath him and he's like, fuck.
Yeah.
So he does seem to enjoy his new bike. He's not around today to ask him because he would be 130 years old.
But now he's making fun of people for riding Schwinn's.
You need an ultralight bike, pussy. If a bike doesn't weigh 87 pounds, it's not really a bike. Anyway, so in 1892, backed with funding from a publication aptly called Outing, Frank Lenz left from New York City and headed west along the Northern Pacific Rail Line. His plan was to ride to the West Coast. At the time, bicycles could only travel by land, so he'd have to take a boat to Japan. And then again to China. And basically, I'm going to bike the world, but about 60% of the trip was by boat.
That is okay if it is a paddle boat.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. He should have had to fucking pedal one of those paddle boats across. But it was not.
That's not fair anyway. When like most of the world's water.
I know, and there were stretches that he took like rivers, like boats across rivers. Like, wait a minute,
hold up, you fucking go around. No, you take your bike through it. You Oregon Trail that shallow shit.
Section, right? So it was mostly just he was writing articles and taking pictures for this publication along the way, which is why they were paying him to do it. It kind of pisses me off, though. Like, honestly, if you think about it, I can barely find time to write like 3 pages of notes for a podcast episode once every 2 weeks. And this asshole was bicycling across country on a bike that probably weighed 100 pounds. And still, like, finding time to write articles. It's bullshit.
I mean, when you dedicate yourself to, you know.
Yeah, but being dedicated to stuff is also bullshit. Like,
yeah, that's true. But, like, we have to live very mundane lives and then, like, still do this show. It's probably a lot easier to write if, like, your job is to write about what you're experiencing.
That's true.
Like,
and you get to do like the one thing that you love. Although, like, I can't think of a hobby that I love enough to be excited. Video games, I guess we used to do that.
Yeah.
I suppose
that's a pretty good point. You spent the better part of a decade like fucking talking about them. So.
And not even getting paid for it. So I don't know. I'm definitely the idiot in this story.
Yeah, we should get in on penny farthing. You're right.
It is an untapped market. We'd say that we'd try to break into like the penny farthing blogging, and we'd find out that it's already being gatekept by the diehard penny farthers.
Yeah, a bunch of people who unironically still wear those fucking like pocket watches and stuff.
Yeah, handlebar mustaches.
Yeah.
So 5 months after leaving the East Coast, Frank reached the West Coast. And in October of 1892, I transposed those.
1792.
And a year that has a 9 and an 8 and a 2 in it. It could have been the year 289. I don't know. Fuck. He departed by boat to Japan. His travels proceeded more or less as he planned. It took him 6 months to pass through China instead of the 3 he had hoped to do it in. As it turns out, bicycling through some of Southeast Asia's most dense tropical jungles and monsoon-soaked roads also proved to be rather unpleasant.
Yeah, fuck that.
So did contracting malaria in Burma. That was kind of a bummer for him. But other than that, and he fucking, malaria, if you've ever learned anything about that, is like one of the worst, like, things to, it's like very, very unpleasant. It just wipes you out completely for a long time. But it didn't stop him. So again, this fucker was way too motivated to ride bicycles across.
He realized the fucking shit propelling out of his ass could get him to places
I can set a land
further.
Speed record. Yeah.
I don't even have to pedal right now. I just
I never even
sweat and shit.
I never considered that, because even in modern day, if you travel like that far overseas, you're almost guaranteed to get, the shits, because our bodies aren't, haven't built up the same tolerances to the same bacteria and stuff. But that's with modern technology. Back then, world travel must have just been just one giant shit fest. Like, I'm surprised. I bet you, and that's what I should have done the topic about. There had to be some like common household traveler's item for shitting into back then with some name like the Portaloo.
No, you found the side of a house of someone who seemed unpleasant, and fuck 'em.
You know what? That might come into play later in the story. I didn't consider that, but we'll get there. So he enjoyed his travels through most places. He kept on persisting after the malaria and the. I don't know how much you know about Southeast Asia and some of those countries. They're really cool. This isn't like a great about it, but they are very muddy and wet and hot and humid and bug filled. So like visiting them could be amazing. Biking through them probably not the most pleasant experience. Yeah,
it's like when you're riding a bike during that just time of day where there's just like fucking gnats and shit everywhere. It's like, best case scenario, you're gonna get like painted by all these fucking bugs and shit.
I remember when we were kids, where I grew up, it was out like, we call it the country, but it wasn't as country. It's a lot of country in Ohio, but I mean, it was like farm, agricultural area. Our block was, like if you each run of the square, if you're doing a square block, was like a mile. So yeah, I mean, country enough. And I remember going out bike riding with my mom once. We were, I don't know how old. We would have been probably 10, 11, 12. Old enough to ride on roads, but, still pretty young. And we got like all the way around this like route that we were doing, and we were about maybe a quarter mile from home, half mile from home. And suddenly must have ridden through, or just the time of day hit, where it was just constant assault from deer flies. And I don't know if you're familiar with deer flies. I know they're called something now. It was fucking awful. Yeah. and this is Ohio, where, I mean, you're getting bit by maybe a half dozen or a little more deer fly. We're talking areas here where you'd be getting bit by a half dozen hundred. So anyway, my point is, he didn't love that part of the trip, but he liked seeing the world, and he kept going. And he really enjoyed his travels through modern-day Iran. Although he was dreading the next leg of the trip, which would take him to Constantinople by way of Erzurum, Turkey. And he was really only dreading it. I mean, it was going to be a long ride through like mostly desert type areas, so that sounds fun. Yeah. But also just that he loved the prior like landscape so much. It was like one of those like, this is section that was really pleasant. It was an relatively easy ride. I love it. And now I've got a desert. So
there's got to be a really like nerve-wracking point in this journey where you get through a lot of stuff you like. You've seen some cool shit. You've seen, some shit that wasn't as cool, or maybe you got fucking malaria. But there's a point where it is quicker to keep going to get home than it is to turn back.
Oh, yeah. Like, if you've ever done any running, like, I used to run, and I hate running, and I'm bad at it. Yeah. That's the worst part, is where you...
when you realize, like, your survival means, like, you don't get to quit.
Yeah, there's no... Yeah, if I decide that... And for me, it wasn't, I might get stuck halfway around the world in a desert and die. Mine was always, this is the point where all of a sudden I have to take a shit really bad. Yeah. And there's no quick, like, I can't turn around to get home quicker. Going before, that midway point's the worst. Anyway, so he wasn't looking forward to the next leg. But he departed from a city called Tabriz in April of 1894. Anyway, so he was like, I mean, I got to keep going. Like you said, you don't really have too many options at that point. And then the days and weeks started to pass without any further updates from Frank, which I hadn't thought of it to this point. I'm curious how he was getting updates back to like his family in the magazine when he was like in Burma. Like, I don't know. I mean, the late 1800s weren't as backwards as like I
There's one poor fucker jogging behind him.
No, it would have to be an army of poor fuckers, because every time you sent a dispatch, one would have to peel off and head back home. Like, they couldn't catch back up to you, so you just had like your
grab the baton
from But yeah, weeks started to go by and nobody heard from him. His last known location put him squarely in what was then the Ottoman Empire, which was in the midst of a number of violent changes, which would bring about the Middle Eastern countries that we were barely taught in our modern history classes. So basically, like when I said he liked Iran, it wasn't Iran yet, Iraq and all those stuff. It was the Ottoman Empire, but it was in the process of becoming these countries violently.
Yeah, just kind of imagine like trying to ride your fucking bike today through like the Vietnam War. You know?
Like, pardon me, excuse me, just riding through.
Ching.
The point being is, you're always going to be, worried when you quit hearing from somebody, but you're extra worried when you quit hearing from somebody that you know is squarely in the middle of a war zone.
Yeah.
Now, I should say his family was worried. His friends were probably worried. Outing, for their part, were less worried because they were pretty stoked that the publicity of his apparent disappearance, that was driving magazine sales.
I was going to say, there's only one reason to put him on that route to begin with. It's
it's, as it turns out, we do a lot of talking today about how shitty modern media is and how, manipulative and how how biased and how just unscrupulous media can be because it's all about the views. Turns out that's not new.
Yeah.
Like I said, Outing was like, oh no, it's a mystery. Buy our magazine to read about how mysterious it is. So for a while they were kind of okay with not hearing from him. Missing, stories of missing and sometimes found explorers are actually a pretty hot ticket back then. It wasn't a one-off situation either. So back to his hero. 4 years after Thomas Stevens, the British guy that had gone around the world on a penny farthing, had done his expedition, he left on a new expedition to find a man named Henry Morton Stanley, who had not been heard from since he had traveled through East Africa up the Congo River.
I was going to say, what if our guy got his hero came back with the penny farthing and just ran him off the road?
Kicked his ass, yeah. It's like, fuck you, you're cheating. You're doing it on a safety bike, pussy. Good. No. So anyway, that guy, he went on this expedition to find a Henry Morton Stanley, and if that name sounds familiar to you, you're probably more educated than me, or can remember stuff better, but in turn, Henry Morgan Stanley was the guy who had famously located Dr. Livingstone, and that fucking quote that we hear all the time, that wasn't actually a real quote, but Dr. Livingstone, I presume. So it turns out one of the most popular pastimes for rich white men in the 1800s was to travel to distant parts of the globe. And if they survived after insulting the existing population, they would return home and claim to have discovered the area, basically. A wonderful time in human history with basically all of it. So when these explorers didn't return, other rich white men would be sent out to find out what had happened. So when readers went from, hey, this Frank Lenz disappearance is such a compelling story, to, hey, somebody should probably actually look into his disappearance, Outing finally did just that. The publication hired the most qualified person they could think of, another cyclist, and sent him, it was a man named William, it's like Schottelbrunn, to Turkey to investigate. There, this guy discovered that Frank had somehow managed to insult a Kurdish chief while passing through their village, and was subsequently ambushed and killed. Which is why I laughed when you said that line about shitting on people's houses. That's probably what happened. Because it never became clear exactly what he did to insult this guy, but this chief was notorious for being one of these guys you don't...
It also was one of the earliest and worst times of road rage.
Right. That's all he did, is say he was riding on the wrong side of the road because he was over in Europe and he's an American. He forgot. And he's like, hey, out of my way. And this guy's like, fuck you. I'm going to kill you now. So, once he went over there and started investigating and the story came out, the Kurdish man thought responsible for the murder was charged and convicted by the Ottoman authorities, but he managed to flee, which is probably good because we know from other stories that we've done that back then, normally what that means is they didn't find the man that murdered him. Already the Kurds and the Ottomans were at war, that they were two of the factions, at odds. So what really probably happened is the Ottomans were like, we want to get rid of this guy anyway. What the fuck? You're the murderer. Like, who knows? Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. I'm not confident in justice being done in this situation. But the man got away, so we'll never know. I guess we wouldn't probably never know if he got executed either, so. As it turns out, though, a number of Armenian locals who helped Shadlbin unravel the murder mystery were also charged for some reason. It's like, and you fucking snitches, you also go to jail. A few of them ended up dying in prison, so that seems like justice. Eventually, the U.S. government managed to pressure the Ottoman Empire into awarding Frank Lenz's mother $7,500 in damages. Though sadly, because her accountant/son had been killed while bicycling in Iran, she misreported the income on her taxes and was forced to surrender the money to the IRS, probably. I made that last fact up, but it seems like something that would happen in this situation. Be like, I don't know how, I got $7,500 for the tragic murder of my son. And the government's like, oh, you got to report that as income. You're fucking going to jail now too, Mrs. Frank Lenz's mom. Whatever. So that's all I have. That's the story of Frank Lenz. A gentleman who bought a penny farthing and then died in Iran because he shot on some guy's house.
Wouldn't have happened with a penny farthing.
Right.
It's like, you can insult anyone out there. You need a fucking grapple hook. Just to climb that fucking wheel, you would have to make sure he stopped.
If nothing else, they'd be too busy laughing at him to kill him. I mean, they'd be like...
They would laugh until he's running him over.
Well, yeah.
Very slowly.
That's... You know what? I'm thinking of more things that would be improved with penny farthings, and one of the top ones, other than, like you said, Trials games, those that definitely needs it. Mad Max movies... I want one of those crazy motherfuckers on penny farthing. I
just want that shit blasting off into a sandstorm.
Yeah, flames shooting out of the pedals or something.
I don't want it to work though. I want it to just be they hype it up. It shoots out of a fucking trailer or something, and then just immediately immediately gets fucked up into a sand tornado.
Yeah. So that's all I had. Like I said, not a long one, but I got to talk about penny farthings, and that was really what drew my attention to the story in the first place.
That brought instant joy to my day. That's why they rode them. That
doesn't happen often.
That's why we rode them. It's because that giant wheel brought a giant smile to the faces of everyone.
I imagine nobody on the street when a penny farthing starts heading their way was smiling. Imagine there was a lot of screaming and running for cover. Right.
that would make me laugh too. To see people outright screaming.
It's basically a Godzilla movie scene where nobody notices at first, and then the one woman pushing a baby stroller just goes white and points and screams, penny farthing! And they all take off running.
It's coming at a leisure pace.
One guy in a fucking pinstripe suit with a handlebar
fucking whistling.
Clearly out of control.
He's whistling the song that Death sang.
Oh, that would be a great creepypasta / fake, because there's all
Absolutely.
I almost did. There's a everybody has them, but there's a Irish folklore. I can't remember the name of the guy, the something. Basically like the Headless Horseman, but it's like the Grim Reaper type thing where you see this guy. Sometimes he's riding a horse with flaming eyes. Sometimes he's got a carriage, whatever. But if you see him, it means he's heading to like usher somebody's soul into the afterlife. Mm-hmm. The American version is some fucker in a pinstripe suit whistling on a penny farthing.
I was going to say, wouldn't it be fucking great if like Jack the Ripper got away from his crimes on a penny farthing?
Though, that would probably have been pretty genius, and because everybody thinks like if you're a serial killer, you want to be as inconspicuous. But the other option is to be the most conspicuous.
Except like you said, it would take him 2 hours to get up on the thing. So like the dead body's just there, and like, fuck, come on.
Fuck, I dropped my knife. I got to get back down.
This stupid thing. I got to find a new bike. That was fun.
I'm currently Googling now after the fact how to mount and unmount a penny farthing.
You had to have a friend with a crane.
And you know what's funny?
Grab you by your lapel.
Google, when I started to type how to mount and unmount a penny farthing, was like the top autocomplete.
But I would love it if Google's like, we don't really know. No one knows how they got on them.
Yeah. So this will make for a compelling end of the episode. I'm watching a video of some fucker on a penny farthing.
It's kind of like Harry Potter and the brooms. Like, you just kind of have to like command the penny farthing to like let you on.
Yeah, like this guy in this video, clearly this is his hobby. He still looks terrified and like he's clinging to it for his life because that's the only way to ride a penny farthing. Yeah. And the other thing is the only option is to do it as fast as humanly possible because there's no I don't know. Yeah, I imagine it's hard to leisurely like ride a penny farthing because that's again, physics at play here. The only thing keeping those fuckers up is forward momentum.
Totally.
Anyway, this video is bullshit because it started with him pedaling, and it looks like it's going to end with him pedaling, and it's not showing me how he got on or off.
Get off it. Prove you can get off it.
Nobody's ever ridden a penny farthing twice because you die when you get off of them.
It's kind of beautiful in a way. It's like the circle of life. The giant circle of life. All right, well. I'm going to chase that dream. I'm going to look up how much penny farthings are now.
Probably absurdly expensive. But...
Probably. Bikes are absurd right now. So yeah. I hope you've been motivated to go get your big wheel. We'll be back next week with another thing. Bye.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I'm going to start working on the form for our website so that you can apply to join our penny farthing club that we're starting.
That's a tier on Patreon. Mm-hmm. Give us $15. You'll be in the penny farthing Patreon.
Yeah. So yeah, enjoy your penny farthings if you go out and purchase them.
Yeah, don't do that. It's the same thing with the TikTok challenges. It's bad news. Don't do it.
We need our listeners. We can't be putting you guys in harm's way.
Yeah.